Hey everyone, I'm Nathan Hughes. Welcome to the Reconcile podcast. We're so glad that you're here. We believe that God is calling all of us to a better future and to look inside and see our potential. That's really what this podcast is all about. So I'm glad that you checked this message out. Hope that you enjoy it and be encouraged. Let's all go out and reconcile the world. We're starting a new series called Made Well. And we see that at the beginning of time, God created humanity and he spoke goodness over us. But something happened. We took a fall. And because of that fall, we've experienced things like heartache, separation, and loss. And we've been wounded. And what God wants to do is he wants to make us well again. He wants to reclaim that goodness in our life. So we're going to be looking at the healing miracles of Jesus during this new series. And we're going to see how he wants to make all of us well.
Well, my name is Shelby, and if I haven't met you yet, I am on staff here at the Grove, and I work in our children's ministry, so I'm used to holding babies and chasing fourth graders. So being here and teaching is different than teaching fourth graders. You're a lot quieter and a lot more respectful than them. I literally had a kid the other day tell me to shut up, and I was just like, but I'm telling you about Jonah. That's my life on Sundays, so it's fun being here on Tuesdays. So Nate actually is at a preaching conference this week and asked me to step in, so you're stuck with me. I apologize, but I'll try to make it more fun. But I know Nate's not here, but I'm so thankful for him and that we all just get to sit under his teaching every week. And if you've been with him for years, you just know that he's just such a great preacher, and I'm honored to even get to speak in his ministry. So we've been going through a series called Made Well. I love it because it sounds like Madewell, like the store. But it's Made Well, and it's going through the healings of Jesus. And I think a lot of times we focus on the miracles of Jesus, and yes, healings obviously are miracles, but I think when we get to sit and focus on how Jesus heals and the way he heals and who he healed and who he just gave a second chance to, and to realize that he is still doing that every day in our lives today, I love just sitting under the teachings of his healings. And so today we're going to be in John 9. We're going to learn about a man who was blind at birth. And so this is a big chunk of scripture that I'm going to read out loud, but it'll also be on the screen. It's 40 verses. So if you're behind on your Bible reading, I'm going to catch you up. So hang with me because it's all important, but I'm going to kind of also skip around. So starting in verse 1. Sorry, I know I'm going to kick this water bottle over. Okay. It says, as he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with his saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Gross. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. Not sure if I said that right. This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg? Some claimed that he was. Others said, no, he only looks like him. How then were your eyes opened, they asked. He replied, this man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see. Where is this man, they asked. I don't know, he said. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He put mud on my eyes, the man replied, and I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others asked, how can a sinner perform such signs? So they were divided. Then they turned again to the blind man. What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. The man replied, he is a prophet. They still did not believe that he had been blind and had received sight until they sent for the man's parents. It's always good when your mom gets brought into this. Is this your son, they asked? Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see? We know he is our son, and we know he was born blind, but But how he can see now or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He's of age. He will speak for himself. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. Skipping down to 24. A second time, they summoned the man who had been blind. Wow. Give glory to God by telling the truth, they said. We know this man is a sinner. He replied, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. Then they asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered, I have already told you, you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to be his disciples too? Then they hurled insults at him and said, you are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. The man answered, now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. To this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out. When they found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? Who is he, sir? The man asked. Tell me so that I may believe in him. And Jesus said, you have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you. Then the man said, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. Jesus said, for judgment I have come into this world, so the blind will see, and those who will see will become blind. Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, what? Are we blind too? Jesus said, if you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin, but now that you claim to see, your guilt remains. Whew, we made it. So obviously this is a story. I'm so sorry. Okay. This is a story of a man who was born blind. And now I'm going to kind of go back through it and kind of tear this story up a little bit. But so from the beginning, we know that Jesus and his disciples come up on a blind man. We know that he was a beggar, that people recognized him as a blind beggar. We don't know his name. We don't know his story. We just know he was a man who was born and he was blind. We know that there was no cause to his blindness. Back in the day, the Jewish culture, they believed that if you were suffering from something, if you had a disease, if something terrible happened to you, is because you sinned or your parents sinned or your family had a generational curse on them, that you did something to cause this sin. And so the disciples asked Jesus, because this is all that they knew in their culture, and so Jesus says it wasn't his parents, it wasn't him, he was born this way. But then he says that he did it basically to glorify God, so that he could do God's work. And so this is what we know of this story so far. And I find it interesting that Jesus kind of just gets right to the point. He says, nope, it wasn't his parents, it wasn't him, but it's the fact that God has an eternal purpose that he wants Jesus to do, that he wants Jesus to work out in his name so that he can get the glory and then they can move on. And so I think often before we get to the part of the man being healed, I think so often we can relate to this question of what happened to him for this to happen. You know, like what happened to this man for him to be blind? And I think a lot of times we go through things in our own life and maybe we think, why is God doing this to us? Or what have I done to end up in this part of my life? Or how did I get on this path? It must have been a decision that I made, or you fill in the blank. I think a lot of times we get caught up asking very similar questions to this or like this. And I think God, sorry. Because my mouth is so dry, I can't handle this. This is ridiculous. I promise it's the last time I'm taking a drink. But I think we get caught up in questioning God. And so the first thing I want us to know is that God isn't after us to punish us. He's after us to heal us. He's after us to bring us back to him. And I think so often what seems to be like a tragedy in our life or a setback or when something just isn't going our way, I think for us in our human eyes, we look at that as for what it is, for a tragedy or something sad or something that is hard to handle. But God is saying, no, what you think is a tragedy is an opportunity for me to work. It's an opportunity for me to work either in you or through you, or I'm going to work through someone else to get your attention. It's an opportunity for me to work, and if only you could see that. And so I think there's a lot of things that prevent us from seeing clearly, and this is something I've asked myself of what has prevented me from seeing clearly. I think a lot of times it's distractions, it's social media, it's exhaustion, maybe it's pain that I'm feeling or experiencing. Maybe I've just fallen asleep spiritually. Maybe I have a tired faith, or I'm just tired of going through the motions in my faith. Maybe I'm in a dry season of life, and there's causes to why I feel like I'm not seeing clearly in my faith. And so I think in order for us to acknowledge that, in order for, I think this is before Jesus can even get to us to heal us or to work with us, we have to acknowledge our own blind spots. And a lot of times it's not easy for us to acknowledge our blind spots. We don't want to. We don't want to know that we're prideful. We don't want to know that we're selfish. We don't want to know that we're lazy or whatever the list is. And so I think for us, if you don't know what your blind spot is, when I don't know what my blind spot is, I begin to just move through life. And I don't realize that I'm moving through life blindly. Now, obviously, this blind man in our story couldn't help being blind. He was born that way, and he was a beggar, and he was probably used to being ignored. But I think for a lot of us, we can look at that as a metaphor of how are you looking at your life? Do you realize that maybe you're moving a little bit blindly in your faith? And so I think in order to acknowledge our blind spots, we have to spend time in prayer. We have to ask God to reveal those to us. We have to spend some time in some self-reflection and ask yourself, what are some blind spots that I might have in my life? And so when Jesus acknowledges the blind man, he doesn't say anything. He stops and he spits on the ground, makes a little bit of mud, puts it on the man's eyes. Now, I've read this story a couple times, and I've put myself kind of in the position of the blind man, but also of the disciple, kind of just like watching Jesus just stop and spit on the ground and pick up the mud and put it on the blind man's eyes. And I wonder if the disciples were just like, that is so rude. But I also wonder how the blind man felt, because this blind man was a beggar, and I guarantee he experienced people walking right past him, spitting at him, hurling insults at him, you name it. And Jesus walks over and spits at him. Then the blind man's sitting there, and then all of a sudden he gets mud rubbed on his eyes. And so I'm wondering, because you don't hear how he's responding to this, what is going through his head of who is spitting on the ground and putting mud on my eyes. And so I also, outside of it being gross, I think it's a beautiful act of Jesus, because when Jesus created man in Genesis, when God created man, he made him out of dust, and he breathed life into their nostrils. And so Jesus goes back to his original materials. He goes back to the dirt. He goes back to what can come out of his mouth. And it's almost like he's giving this man a new life or a new chance. And so after that, he spits on the man's eyes, puts mud on his eyes. He commands the man to go and wash. Now, his response, the blind man, could have been, okay, well, of course I'm going to go wash my face. You just put mud on my eyes. Or, okay, this man just acknowledged me. He just touched my eyes. And so because he told me to go wash in the pool, I'm going to do what he says. Now, I think Jesus easily could have spoken his sight into existence. I think he easily could have touched his eyes and he could see. Jesus didn't have to do anything because he's Jesus. He could have healed him right then and there, could have opened his eyes easily. The man could have seen, and that would be it. But Jesus asked him to go in faith, and he wanted him to extend faith and to go to the pool and obey. Basically, it's just he asked him to go, he went, and then he could see. And so I think what I don't want us to miss also in this part is that When the blind man went to the pool, he was still blind. He was still walking to the pool blindly, even though Jesus put mud on his eyes, spoke to him, acknowledged him. He had to go in faith to the pool that maybe something was going to happen. If nothing was going to happen, at least he was going to wash his eyes off. How many times has God called you into something blind? And maybe you have to just go blind because you know in your heart, this is God calling me to do this. I know this is him speaking to me. I know that this has to be from God. And so I'm just going to go even though I can't see yet. Or I'm going to go even off this little voice that I heard that I should do this. And so I just love that he got up in his faith. Jesus gave him an opportunity to respond in faith, and that he went. And so I just want to ask if you've ever experienced saying yes to God in blind faith. Have you ever tried to just say, I don't know what's on the other side of this. I don't know how I'm going to get there. I don't know how this is going to work, but I know that this is God, and I know that he's asking me to do this. Maybe it's time that we exercise a little bit more of having a blind faith, because at the end of the day, who cares what you look like having blind faith? And so I think many healings of Jesus that we've studied the past couple weeks, they have required a response of faith from the person being healed. Whether it's Jesus questioning their faith before he heals them, maybe before he even heals them, he asks if they believe, or he tells them to go and do something before the miracle happens. And so in order for us to experience any kind of healing or any kind of anything from God, we have to have faith. We have to acknowledge who he is. We have to see him. We have to see what he's trying to do in our lives. And I think the main thing I don't want us to miss is that I think if we went to God and spoke to God and asked him to take away our suffering whenever he wanted or whenever we wanted him to, I think we would end up following him out of comfort. And I think we would end up following him out of convenience. And he doesn't want that from us. He wants us to follow him out of love and out of devotion, not out of what we can get from him, not out of how he can heal us, not out of how he can make our circumstances go away or get better. He wants you to love him. He wants you to be devoted to him. And when that happens, when you love him, when you're devoted to him, the healings come, the miracles come, the relationship with him comes. And after the miracle for this blind man, it wasn't easy. So he was surrounded by a lot of questions and a lot of people, and there was 4 different responses that surrounded this blind man after he could see. It was only after he could see that people cared about why he could see. His neighbors, the people who were questioning him, they were skeptic. The Pharisees, they showed disbelief. They asked everyone. They couldn't believe it. His parents recognized what had happened, but they kept quiet out of fear of what would happen to them. But the healed man showed consistent faith the entire time. He had an increasing awareness of what had happened to him and who was healing him. And I think the blind man also gives us an example of what an increasing awareness looks like. Because when he was first questioned, he said, it was a man named Jesus. I don't know who he was. All I know is he's a man named Jesus, and all I know I couldn't see, and now I can see. He got questioned again. He said, yeah, I think he was a prophet. He got questioned again, and he was like, he's a man from God. So first he's Jesus, but then think maybe he's a prophet. But I know he's from God. And at the very end, he says that he is the Son of God, worthy of praise. And so the entire time, he has this increasing awareness of who Jesus is after the miracle. It doesn't get until the very end when he's answering question after question of, yes, I couldn't see, and now I can see. It's, yes, I was the blind beggar, and now I can see. I don't know how I can see. I just know that I was encountered by a man named Jesus. He is the Son of God, worthy of all the praise. That's all I know. End of story. And so I think for us, we all have an opportunity to have an increasing awareness of Jesus. But you're going to get questioned by your neighbors and your friends. You're going to have people who are skeptical of you. You are going to have people telling you you look silly or you're foolish. Maybe your life is now changing from what it was, and you're not who you were anymore, and people are skeptical of that. And every single time, the blind man's answer was, but it was Jesus. But it's Jesus. It was Jesus. All I know is that I was this, and now I'm this. And so I want you to fill in that blank of what does it look like in your life? I was blank, but now I'm blank. I was lost, then I met Jesus, now I'm found. I was sick, then I met Jesus, now I'm healed. Or whatever that is for you, I was lonely, then I met Jesus, and then I was this. And I think for him, for the blind man, to acknowledge Jesus in front of his neighbors, his parents, the Pharisees were all up in arms, all because this all happened on the Sabbath, and they loved the Sabbath because it was their one time that they could basically like write a ticket to everyone who did something they shouldn't be doing on the Sabbath. They didn't care about the blind man. They didn't care about Jesus. They didn't care about anything other than people broke the rules and we're going to punish these people. And so they're the like Jewish leaders, and this blind man is just like, why do you care? Do you want to be his disciple? Because this is what I know. And so I think for us to have to answer to people, I think is always going to be the hardest thing. And I think chasing after Jesus is always going to be the hardest thing. But I just love that the blind man stuck to his answer. He stuck to his story. And every single time he did that, he had an increasing awareness of who Jesus was. And I think every time you do that, every time you say no to the things that you shouldn't be doing, that I don't know what it is in your life. I don't know what that looks like. You're having an increased awareness of who Jesus is and why it's important for you to follow after him and to do what the Bible says and to have a relationship with him. And so I think this blind man had a story. We don't know what his story was, but now his story is, once I was blind and now I see. And what I know from this is your story matters. Because once you were this, and now you are this. And so I think for all of us, at one point, we were all spiritually blind. I think we go through seasons where we're spiritually blind. And really all that means is you're just lacking perception. You're lacking awareness. You're lacking discernment. And Jesus doesn't come to us and say, you've lost your sight, or why aren't you seeing me the way you once did? Or where have you gone? He doesn't ever come at us like that. He comes and says, how do you need me to come to you? How do you need to see me? And I think from that, we pass from just a little bit of knowledge about him to a greater knowledge, when then all of a sudden that's all you see is him. And with that becomes a greater love for him, to want to just live your life for him. To the point where you don't care who you're talking to, you just know that Jesus is the Son of God, worthy of all the praise, just like how he got to in his story. And so I think the most important thing for us now is to, is to believe that what Jesus does here, he still does here. What Jesus says here in the Bible, Jesus says today. And who he's healing in the Bible, he's still healing today. It may not look the same, it may not sound the same, but he's after us the same way he was after the very people he was healing in the Bible. And I think for us to sit and to read and to study, when we start to realize the things that he's done, and for the people here, we start to see that he's still alive and still at work, and the people all over the world in us. And when Jesus stops and says, I am the light of the world, I am the good shepherd, I am the resurrection and the life, I am the way, the truth, and the life, I am the door, I am the whatever. I don't want to say whatever, that's so rude. Jesus does not say that. But he says, I am. And do you believe him at his word when he says, I am? Because when we do that and we realize that these people in the Bible, they're not special, there are no exceptions. We see that because this is how God is after us today in our own lives. And so don't ever think he's not going to do it for you. Don't ever think that he's done waiting for you. Don't ever think that he's annoyed with you or done with you, because he's not. He's waiting for you to see. He's waiting for you to open your eyes. He's waiting for you to wake up just a little bit. He's waiting for you to figure out your blind spots. He's willing to help you figure out your blind spots. And so I think it's important for us to get to know Jesus at his word, not at how we feel like relating to him, not at what we think we know about him, not at the times when we need him the most, but the times when you're good and the times when life is good, keep him on the front burner of your life. I think so often it's easy for us to put him on the back burner and listen to our friends and listen to our neighbors and the skeptics and the people who are criticizing you, and whatever it is, whatever it looks like in your life, stop and get to know Jesus at his word. Stop and get to know him. And so what are you doing with what you're seeing? How do you see Jesus? How do you think he sees you? I think these are important questions for us to ask, not once, not twice, but every day. How do you see Jesus? Are you spending time with Jesus? Do you have a time when you're spending just quiet moments with Jesus? What does that look like? For me, it looks like waking up and making coffee and sitting at my kitchen table with my Bible and a pen. Sometimes I don't write anything. Sometimes I just need to read. Sometimes I just need to sit in silence and just pray. So whatever it is, whatever that looks like for you, spend time with Jesus first, because when you get to know him, when you spend time with him, you're going to start to see the miracles that he's doing in your life. You're going to start to see the way he wants to heal you, whether it's from your past, whether it's from hurts, pain, whatever it is, he sees that and he cares about it, but he wants your faith. He wants your heart. He wants you to chase after him, to love him, to be devoted to him, not just what you can get, but it's what can you give to him? What can you say to him? How can you spend time with him? How can you chase after him? Maybe you just need to reintroduce yourself to him. That's okay. When you're willing to reintroduce yourself to him, he's like, cool, I'm going to reintroduce myself to you. He will go through hoops to meet with you and to be with you. I used to always tell myself, I heard this in college, if I was 100 steps away from Jesus, all right, that's too small. If I was 1,000 steps away from Jesus, Jesus will take 999 steps to get to you if you just take one. And maybe he's asking you just to take that one step to him tonight. Maybe he's asking you just to see him differently and to see him in a new light. I don't know what that looks like for you. But I want to end tonight kind of in just like a guided prayer. I think I don't want to leave tonight just listening or just being, but I want to invite Jesus into your space. I want to invite him just to meet with you. And so I'm not going to make you do anything awkward or anything. This is just what I do sometimes, and it's helpful for me to just pause and reset my faith a little bit. So where you're at, just want you guys to close your eyes. And I'm just going to pray. But before I do, I want you guys just to go to a place. Whether that's the beach, the mountains. I want you to visualize a place that's comfortable for you, that's a comfort for you. Now, when you find that place, I want you to put Jesus in that place. What does he look like? Now, I want you just to look at him. Just look at him in that space. And now I want you to put yourself in that space with Jesus. Now, before you guys say anything, I just want you to just look. What do you look like? What are your emotions? How are you feeling? And now for the next minute, Just talk to him. Tell him how you're feeling. Tell him about your day. The desires in your heart, the hurts, the pains, tell him all of it. Jesus, thank you so much for tonight. Thank you for the space that you've created in our heads. Thank you for meeting us here. Thank you for giving us the space to visualize and to take a deep breath in your presence. God, we thank you so much for the way that you love us. God, you loved us. You love us so much that you sent Jesus. That you sent him to this earth to heal and to love and to do miracles and to teach us a new way of life and a new way of living. All because you love us and because you love this world. And so, Jesus, I thank you for the way that you heal. I thank you for the way that you do miracles, for the way that you relate to us individually. God, we thank you for your word, that that's where we find you, that we can find you in the words that will never change, that are here for eternity, that we can see you in scriptures, that we can see you in our lives. Jesus, we thank you for your fingerprints all throughout our lives, the way that you are orchestrating everything. I just pray that you help us to fight to see you when we don't want to. I just pray over this room. I pray over these people tonight that as they leave tonight and as they go out these doors and into their cars and when they go home, that they are surrounded by your presence and your protection, that you go before them this week, that you surround them at work, at school, whatever it is that they have going on, that they can feel your presence, that they can see you, that they can see you differently. God, we thank you so much for the way that you love us, for giving us a space where we can worship you and learn about you and just fall more in love with you, Jesus. We love you so much. And so I just thank you for tonight. I thank you for your love. And I thank you for the way that you teach us. We praise you so much. You're the Son of God who is so worthy of our praise. And I just want our lives to reflect that our lives will just be beautiful because you are beautiful, and that we would just be living sacrifices for you, that we would just be your hands and your feet, that we can love people the way that you love people. God, I pray that we don't just walk right past people, that we stop and we see people, and that we can relate to people through our stories and the ways that you have worked in our lives. And so we just pray that you continue to work in us. We love you so much, Jesus. In your sweet and holy, precious name I pray. Amen.